Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be diving into something I know a lot of you are really interested in and have brought up before. The whole idea of education versus knowledge.
Yeah, it's definitely a fascinating area.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out, is formal education the only way to really understand something? And can you actually have that deep knowledge without ever stepping foot in a classroom?
Right. Like, can you be truly knowledgeable even if you haven't followed that traditional educational path?
We've got some really interesting sources that actually look at both sides of this, even contrasting education without knowledge versus knowledge without education. So let's see if we can unpack all this and make it make sense.
Exactly. The sources you've sent are amazing because they really dig into this assumption that education and knowledge are basically the same thing, which, when you think about it, isn't always true.
Right, like maybe you have the piece of paper, but do you actually get it?
Exactly. So what we really want to do is use these distinctions and examples to help you figure out how you learn best and what's really going to work for you.
Okay, so before we go too far, let's make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about education, what are we actually talking about here?
Good point. In this context, we're mainly talking about formal education. Think schools, colleges, universities, the whole structured system with courses, curriculum, leading to degrees and qualifications.
Okay, so that traditional path. And then how does knowledge fit into this? Like, what makes it different from just having gone through that whole education system?
Well, knowledge is more about truly understanding something. It's not just about taking in information, it's about being able to actually use it in real life, make decisions based on it. And the thing is, you can gain knowledge in so many different ways. Experience, teaching yourself just by observing the world. It doesn't have to come from a textbook.
Oh, so it's like education might give you the information, but knowledge is when you actually internalize that and can put it into practice. Like knowing the rules of a game versus actually being able to play it well.
Exactly. And your sources bring up a really interesting point. You could have someone with a PhD, the highest level of formal education, right? But they might still lack certain practical skills.
Right, all theory, no action.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, you might have someone who's never even been to college, but has this incredibly deep understanding of something just from years of experience.
So they've got that street smarts, that hands-on wisdom.
Exactly. So it really challenges the idea that those pieces of paper equal true knowledge.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. So let's dive into that first idea, education without knowledge. What does that actually look like in the real world?
So education without knowledge is basically when someone's gone through the whole system, they've got the degree, but they don't actually grasp the subject or know how to apply it. It's like having all the ingredients, but not knowing how to bake a cake.
Oh yeah, the classic cram for the exam and then forget everything scenario.
Exactly. And your sources talk about how some students just focus on memorizing facts to get good grades. The goal is the degree, not the actual learning. So the information goes in one ear and out the other, and they never really develop that deeper understanding.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people go for a degree not because they love the subject, but because they think it'll get them a certain job or make them look good.
That's a really important point. Sometimes the motivation for education isn't really about learning at all. It's about external pressures, like what society expects or what you think you need for your career.
Right, it's that checking the box mentality.
And your sources had a great example of this, someone with a business degree who can't actually run a business because they lack those real-world skills.
So they have the theory, but not the practice.
Exactly. They might understand all the concepts on paper, but when it comes to actually dealing with customers, managing finances, all of that, they're lost. Like, knowing music theory doesn't automatically make you a great musician.
Right, you have to put it into practice. But even if the knowledge isn't that deep, are there any advantages to going through that formal education process?
Oh, absolutely. One big thing is the structure it provides. Schools and universities break down complex topics into smaller, more manageable chunks, and they often provide resources and support to help you along the way.
So it gives you that roadmap to follow, helps you stay on track.
Exactly. And as we mentioned before, degrees can be really important for getting certain jobs. Employers often use them as a filter when they're hiring.
Yeah, that piece of paper can definitely open doors, even if you learn the real skills later on.
Right. And the other thing is, going through a formal program often helps you develop important skills like discipline, time management, teamwork, all those things you need to succeed in any field.
It's like a training ground for the working world in a way.
Exactly. And you're also surrounded by other students, professors, mentors. It creates a whole network of people you can learn from and connect with.
So even if you don't get that deep knowledge right away, there are still benefits to that formal structure, those credentials, and the connections you make. But what about the downsides? We've hinted at some of them.
Sources talk about how sometimes graduates come out lacking those practical problem-solving skills and critical thinking abilities.
So they can't really think for themselves or apply what they've learned to new situations.
Right. And there's also the concern that some institutions might be more focused on profit than actual education, prioritizing enrollment numbers over teaching quality.
Yeah, that's worrying if the focus is on the business side rather than the actual learning.
Absolutely. And then the other big issue is this over-reliance on certificates and degrees. Just because someone has those qualifications doesn't automatically mean they're competent.
Right, it's not a guarantee of success.
Exactly. A degree can be a great asset, but it's not a replacement for actual knowledge and skills.
It's like having the map, but not knowing how to actually navigate the terrain.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to be able to apply what you know in the real world.
Okay, so we've looked at the potential pitfalls of education without knowledge. Now let's flip it and talk about knowledge without education. What does it mean to have deep understanding and valuable skills without going down that traditional academic route?
So knowledge without education is all about gaining understanding and skills through other means. Think hands-on experience, self-directed learning, just immersing yourself in something you're passionate about.
Like a self-made expert, and earlier we mentioned people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. They're great examples of that, right?
Absolutely. Those are classic examples of people who achieved incredible things without necessarily having tons of formal education. They were driven by their own curiosity, they taught themselves, they experimented, and they weren't afraid to take risks.
So they built their knowledge through real-world experience.
Exactly. And your sources point out that you can do this through reading, experimenting, working directly in a field. It's all about that constant learning and applying what you learn.
It's like creating your own personalized curriculum based on your own interests and goals. Like the example we talked about before, the mechanic who can fix anything but never went to auto school.
Exactly. They've learned by getting their hands dirty, and they've developed an incredible level of expertise.
So what are some of the benefits of learning this way?
One big advantage is that the knowledge you gain is usually very practical. You learn by solving real problems, so you become a really effective problem solver.
You're not just learning the theory, you're living it.
Exactly. And another advantage is the freedom you have. You're not limited by a set curriculum. You can learn anything you want at your own pace in a way that works for you.
So it's super flexible and adaptable to your own needs.
Right. And let's not forget the cost. Self-learning can be a lot cheaper than traditional education. You can use libraries, online resources, all sorts of things.
That's a huge factor for a lot of people.
And this kind of learning often fosters a lot of creativity and resourcefulness. You have to be more independent and figure things out on your own, which can lead to some really innovative solutions.
So you're not just following a set path, you're forging your own way. But there have to be some challenges too, right?
Of course. One of the biggest ones is that you might not get that official recognition. In many fields, you need a degree or certification to even get your foot in the door.
So it's harder to prove your knowledge and skills without that piece of paper.
Right. And self-learning can be unstructured. You might miss some fundamental concepts or develop gaps in your knowledge if you're not careful.
It's like you're building a house without a blueprint.
Exactly. And you might also miss out on the guidance and feedback you get from teachers and mentors in a more formal setting.
That one-on-one support can be invaluable. And there are also some professions where formal education is absolutely essential.
Absolutely. Things like medicine, engineering, law, you need that rigorous training and licensing to protect public safety.
So there are definitely fields where self-learning alone just isn't enough.
Right.
Okay, so we've explored the potential of both education without knowledge and knowledge without education. So for our listener who's clearly motivated to learn quickly and thoroughly, what's the best approach? How can they find that balance?
Well, based on these sources, it seems like the ideal approach is to combine the best of both worlds. You can get the structure and credentials from formal education, but then actively seek out ways to apply what you're learning in real-world situations.
So it's about being proactive and not just passively absorbing information.
Exactly. Focus on understanding and applying the concepts, not just memorizing for exams. And if you haven't gone the traditional education route, then lifelong learning becomes even more important. Keep seeking out new information, new skills, new experiences.
And it seems like the job market is starting to value skills and experience more than just degrees, which is a good sign.
Definitely. Employers are looking for people who can actually do the work, not just people who have a piece of paper.
So it's about what you can do, not just what you've studied.
Exactly.
So the key takeaway here seems to be, no matter what your background is, cultivate that curiosity, stay open to learning, and always be looking for ways to actually use the knowledge you gain.
I think that sums it up perfectly.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, we've really gotten to the heart of this complex relationship between education and knowledge. We've seen how formal education can be valuable, but doesn't guarantee true understanding. And we've seen how powerful it can be to gain knowledge through experience and self-directed learning, even with its challenges. The important thing is to be aware of both sides and find what works best for you.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's not about one being better than the other. It's about finding that balance and making it work for you.
And for our listener who's so eager to learn and grow, here's a final thought. Don't just stop at learning the information. Actively look for ways to apply it. Experiment, build things, try things out in the real world, because that's how you truly transform information into real, lasting knowledge.